Shalom. Thank you for inviting me. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you, as I loved being with you 2 years ago in Birmingham, where we pushed through thinking on nonviolence and imagined revolutionary nonviolence. This panel is moving toward a conception of peace, or a peace movement, that includes a critical disability perspective, ensures that the practical aspects of bodily inclusiveness that would allow the participation of all people with disabilities in this organization and in the wider peace and justice movement of which it is a part. But first, I want to talk about what feminism and feminists have brought to the peace movement in redefining the field, making connections, and insisting on an intersectional definition of peace. I invoke Barbara Deming as an elder of our movement, and I want to call her out here and remind you of her perspective. In her book, Revolution and Equilibrium, Barbara presents the metaphor of the two hands of nonviolence. She says, with one hand, we say to one who is angry, or to an oppressor, or to an unjust system, stop what you are doing. I refuse to honor the role you are choosing to play. I refuse to obey you. I refuse to cooperate with your demands. I refuse to build the walls and the bombs. I refuse to pay for the guns. With this hand, I will even interfere with the wrong you are doing. I want to disrupt the easy pattern of your life. But then the advocate of nonviolence raises the other hand. It is raised outstretched, maybe with love and sympathy, maybe not, but always outstretched. With this hand we say, I won't let go of you or cast you out of the human race. I have faith that you can make a better choice than you are making now, and I will be here when you are ready. Like it or not, we are part of one another. And this was a founding document of the feminist peace movement and of suggesting that the personal and the political are integral, they're one, and that the peace movement has to have a much larger perspective. It integrates all kinds of levels of life, violence, interaction, the public and the private. And these changes, I think, have led into a number of transformations in our analysis of peace and of justice over many years, and I think it's time for another transformation or another evolution, if you will. The disability movement is significantly indebted to feminism and grows out of feminism, both in terms of the actual relationships between real people, but in terms of the ideas too, the confidence to go ahead and to insist on the intersectionality, to insist that other movements need to include disability as a perspective, not just as an inclusivity or a civil rights perspective, but that the ideas of critical disability thinking and movement and politics, and also I think what many of you may know who are participants in resistance movements, is that people with disabilities are at the forefront of radical tactics as they're being developed on behalf of the Medicare for All movement, on healthcare, and on all kinds of issues of access and inclusivity. And so what I want to talk about is really the several parts, I think, of the movement of people with disabilities that I think potentially should feed into the peace movement and redefining peace and justice for this organization, which those of you who are, I think, scholars and academics and activists, all of you should know more about. People don't know about this, and we should. And it's not somebody else's movement, it's all of our movement. And so I want to raise, there's a lot to say, but I want to make 3 points basically, or talk about 3 aspects of this as it relates to the topic here at hand. One is, the first is the electrifying actions of people with disabilities and the leading of resistance movements. This has had a lot of publicity. People may know that Americans with Disabilities Act and the Canadian versions of, and other versions of the same thing, civil rights legislation for inclusion and rectifying the tilt and unfairness. Some of the most important civil disobedience has been done in places like Bolivia, where thousands of people walked hundreds of miles in wheelchairs, on crutches, and confronted the government in the town square in 2012 over benefits and civil rights and treatment and prejudice against people with disabilities. This is an action that you should look up and see what they did, what they said, the visuals. It's a very amazing thing. And also it's interesting, they were confronting a socialist government, which needed confronting. And then also the various actions that have happened in this country over AIDS and healthcare, in particular, over access, where people have used their bodies, people with disabilities, in a particularly effective way of climbing and crawling upstairs or into places. And this is an ongoing part of a radical disability movement. And that involves the remaking of attitudes about the body, of physical space, of architecture, of the public world in all kinds of ways. So the challenges are multiple, and really the vision, it breaks out the vision of what it is to be human, and the kind of maybe humanism that we might like to be moving forward here, which is informed by more physicality and ecological perspective, embodied existence as part of nature and part of each other, that we're not discrete individuals. And so people with disabilities, though, suggest that we need a way wider sense of what a human body is, and also of the fragility and vulnerability and mortality that we all share. Part of the antipathy to people with disabilities, or the avoidance, is that people don't want to face their own fallibility, mortality, and vulnerability. And this is a really central theme for feminism, for environmental movements, for peace. And so this is a really central way to illustrate this point, which I think is crucial to developing a vision of peace and a peace movement. And this is something people with disabilities blow out and amplify in a way that has not been done before. A sort of understanding, a visceral understanding of the body, and of a different way of thinking about the body, and also of normality and the latent authoritarianism that's in the idea of the normal. So this is what we want to get rid of, and what we want to challenge. And we want to do it at an intellectual level, theoretically, in the academy with scholarship, but we want to do it politically in the streets. And we want to do it practically in terms of how we put together an organization like the Peace and Justice Studies Association, where there's a lot of work to be done on infrastructure and attitudes and practical changes, if, as has been talked about, a future conference may be on the theme of disability. So all of this is, the aspect of what it means for the organization, the scholarship and critical perspectives, the familiarity with the movement and what the tactics bring, and the fearless militance, really, of people with disabilities, the willingness to use what are fragile and vulnerable bodies. All of our bodies are fragile and vulnerable, but this is more transparently so for people who are recognized as having disabilities, or recognized as having disabilities. So this means, I think it means a lot for everyone. It means a lot in terms of leadership of the movement, in terms of thinking, in terms of theoretical advancements, and in terms of what's necessary to have a conference or a meeting of your organization, or to do anything. And so I think that, everybody here needs to stop, if you do, thinking of disability movement as something separate, but as something that's part of the peace movement. And this is a really critical perspective that is, something that we're just really getting started on here. And I'm really glad that you're doing this and pushing in this direction. It's something new and great. Okay.